Nigel Slater, welcome and thank you so much for agreeing to join us on one of our chats. Very kind of you.
Thank you for asking.
I want to share something before we actually start. I want to share something which I thought was one of those curious coincidences that we get quite a lot of those happening. And 2 or 3 weeks back, when I phoned you early afternoon to ask whether you'd be kind enough to do this, we chatted for quite a while. And at the end of the phone call, I was phoning from home because most of the time I'm in lockdown. And at the end of the phone call, my wife said to me, "And who were you talking to?" And I said, "I was just chatting with Nigel Slater." And she said, "Well, that's extraordinary. You had his lamb beetroot burger for lunch." And it was very wonderful.
Hear that. I'm glad to hear that. It is one of the joys actually of doing what I do is when you hear that somebody has made one of the recipes. But if I'm stopped in the street and somebody said, "Oh, I made such and such last night," there is this second of self-doubt where you're thinking, what are they going to say? So it's lovely when people say they've had a good time with a recipe and that it's been a success. Or indeed when they send you pictures of it, which happens now, of course, with social media.
Yes. May I ask how you're coping in these strange times?
When I heard that we were going to be locked down, and I was actually away. I was in Korea at the time. And I thought it was a little odd when I went to check into my hotels and I had my temperature taken. My passport, yes, and credit card, yes, but also my temperature. And I realized that something very serious was happening. And then I got to the airport and I was the only person in my section on the plane. I mean, it was just me. And I realized straight away there was something very, very wrong. And when we landed in London, I came straight home and realized that at the time I'd been in an area very close to where it all started. And I went straight into really quite serious lockdown mode. And I actually thought it was a bit of a gift in a way, the idea that I would have 6 weeks or more to myself, being able to just write, to concentrate on writing without all that other stuff that I, forgive me, but I refer to as the buggerance of life. There wasn't going to be any of that. There was just going to be me cooking and writing. But it didn't turn out like that, because what happened, I found I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. Here was this chance, this gift to write solidly for 6 weeks, and I could write one paragraph and then I had to go and walk around the garden or tidy a cupboard. I mean, I've got cupboards that would put Marie Kondo to shame. I mean, filed T-shirts in color coding, It was extraordinary that it didn't leave me this wonderful sort of peaceful space that I thought it would.
And is going out different? I'm presuming, do you go out to shop? And
very little. I've had stuff delivered. I shop at my local shops. I'm really lucky to have a whole terrace of, I say specialist shops. They're considered specialists now, but years ago they were just local shops. Butchers and bakers and a good deli and a cheesemonger and a fish shop. And the difference is that shopping takes much longer. So I have to stand in the queue. And of course, you have to check which queue you're standing in. You think you're queuing at the fishmongers and you're not, you're queuing for the dry cleaners next door. So you take your space in the queue, and it does take a long time to do the shopping, particularly if I've got a sort of photographic shoot on and I've got quite a lot of food to get hold of. A local dog barking outside. I suppose I've now got used to it. I know it's going to take me longer. The lovely thing is the sort of camaraderie in the queue, that you find yourself chatting to people who you may have seen before shopping and have never really spoken to them. But because you're standing there waiting to go in, you start nattering away about this and that, obviously very often recipes. And that has been quite a delight, really. But yeah, it takes quite a long time to shop now.
And are you recognised everywhere you go?
No, not everywhere. And it's a mixed blessing. There are, it really is one of the great delights of life is when people stop me in the street to say hello. It's lovely. But at the same time, I'm quite shy. And so I do find it a little bit difficult at first. And also there are times when you don't necessarily want to be stopped. You know, I live with the guilt of having to run for a train and saying to a very nice lady who stopped me, "I'm sorry, I'm running for a train, I've got to go." And I felt so guilty about it because I couldn't say hello to her, I couldn't talk to her. But no, is this why I go to Japan and to Korea for my sort of holidays each year? Maybe that I'm not recognized, I don't know. But I think if you do any sort of media at all, if you write or if you're ever on television and you are recognized, I think if you genuinely don't like it and you don't like people coming up to you, then I think you're in the wrong business. Because it's a lovely, generous thing when someone says, "Hello, I bought your book. I saw your play," or whatever. It's lovely.
Yes. Have you had an underlying nervousness about this and about catching it? Has that bothered you, or?
No, not at all. I had a very nasty cough that I couldn't shift. And I actually had a couple of days in bed just before I left for my holiday. So, and I have heard recently that there was a little bit of it about, probably before we really heard about COVID. So that may well have been it. I don't know, a mild dose. So I don't know. I'm not worried about it. There is finding a line between being very careful and being frankly neurotic about it. And I've tried to find that place where, you know, I'm really not going to disinfect the shopping when it comes in. I'm not going to spray every letter that comes with antiseptic gel. But at the same time, I'm aware that it is very easy to catch it. So I have been careful. And I'm very close to the age when I, you know, should have been well and truly locked in. So I guess I've been aware that I've got to watch myself, yes, and watch other people.
Will you say a little bit about why you're a cook and not a chef? Is that a fair question?
It's a very fair question. And I've always felt that if you call yourself a chef, then you work in a restaurant, you work somewhere where you're probably going to give somebody a bill at the end of it. That you are going to cook professionally for other people and charge for your services. So for instance, if you're work if you're a hospital chef or you work in a hotel or a restaurant, yes, the word is the right word because it means chief. You are in charge of a band of people. And when people say yes, chef, they're really saying yes, chief. You're the boss. Now, I'm my own boss. I'm the one who says what I cook and how I cook and whether I've got something right or not initially, although the readers are the true test. But I'm really my own chef. So in fact, I'm a cook. I think that what I do is all about the home. And I don't know anybody who calls themselves a chef when they only cook from home for home. And that's what I do. I'm a home cook. So the idea of being a chef, one, I think it's incorrect, but also I am a failed chef. You know, all I wanted to do when I was a little boy was be a chef. I wanted to wear that tall white hat and the apron, and I wanted to work in a big kitchen. And I trained for that. And I trained very hard. And I went around the country and did what they now call a stage, but in those days it was just an apprenticeship. And yet, the moment I went into a really tough, hard, busy kitchen, I realized I was in the wrong place. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the temperament. I didn't enjoy myself. And it was more about teamwork than I really wanted it to be. You know, if I was cooking the vegetables, they had to be ready at the exact moment that the guy who was cooking the meat would have his bit ready. And that wasn't for me. I'm quite a calm cook. I cook slowly and I suppose quite gently. And the idea of working against the clock, of working with other people in a hot, sweaty, often sweary kitchen, I felt so out of place. And I ran away. I literally ran away. I did a test a couple of weeks, and every day I would walk home. I was in Yorkshire, I was in Ilkley at the time, and I would walk home to my digs, and I'd say to my landlady, I hate this. I can't do it. And then when the day came when I was supposed to take over my my job as one of the chefs there, I was on my way to Cornwall on a train, terrified. I just couldn't handle it. And so calling myself a chef would also be a reminder of one of my great failures.
And will you tell us something about your day, your working day? Is there a pattern to it, or?
Well, I've got quite a few hats. So I have my column in the Observer, which I've been writing for nearly 30 years. I write books, but also I get involved in other projects. Sometimes there'll be a television series that I'm working on. Last year I spent a lot of time working on the stage production of Toast, my memoir. So I've got lots of different hats. So the days are different, but I wake very early. I'm a real sort of 5 o'clock, awake person, and annoyingly jolly and chatty first thing in the morning. And my batteries sort of wear down around about 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm ready to do very little. But those first few hours, so the first 2 to 3 hours of the day, are my most creative, my most constructive. And it's when I get most of my writing done, a little bit of cooking. That's when I'm busiest. And I do love those 3 hours. And I don't really look at social media. I certainly don't look at emails, and I don't open the post. What I do is write and I cook. And then I'll stop. Around about 11, I will stop and have what I consider to be a very important part of my day, which is I make a cup of tea. And I only really drink green tea. I'm not good on black teas. So I make green tea and I go into another room or I go into the garden and I sit quietly. And it's an absolute ritual. It's something that started a few years ago. I can't drink at my desk. I certainly can't eat at my desk. And that cup of tea will be accompanied by a slice of cake or a biscuit. I'm very partial to a dark chocolate digestive. There will be, or a Tunnock's caramel wafer. There will always be something on the plate next to my cup of tea. And it's a very important time for me. And then I'll go back and I will work. I will go back to my laptop or I'll go back to the kitchen. But by that time, I'm not as creative. I'm not as industrious. And that will take me through until late lunchtime, which is my main meal of the day. And I always cook. I don't have to cook. I mean, I know that there are wonderful things that you can just buy from the supermarket and pop in the oven and they're ready in 20 minutes, but I never think about them. I just cook. It's almost part of my DNA is to make myself something to eat. And if there's someone else around, I'll make them something to eat. It's what, it's what I do. And a lot of the week, I actually spend working with a creative partner, James, who I've worked with for about 10 years. And we work on recipes together. We'll both have meetings about what we've made at home over the week, and he'll tell me what he's done, and I'll tell him what I've done. And then we work on the recipes, we test them and develop them. And then we will cook them for photography, which is a once a week thing. And then I go away and write the recipes, and I write all the text to go with it, which I love doing. And I suppose my day is about 50%, about 70% writing, and about 30–40% actually hands-on cooking at the hob. And then there's all the other stuff, all the paperwork that goes with doing what I do. So there is a day that is punctuated by nice little things to eat all the way through, from my coffee in the morning through to mid-morning tea, and then always lunch, always lunch. And strangely, since lockdown, I've now found myself pouring a little drink at 6 o'clock, which I hadn't done for years. And I'm now, around about 3 o'clock, I'm thinking, what will it be tonight? Will it be a glass of wine? Will it be a nice cold beer or a chilled sherry? So that's a new ritual, and I'm rather liking it.
May I ask you, we perhaps talk more about Japan, but you've already mentioned your trips to Japan and Korea. Do you have any sort of what I suppose one might call esoteric practice within your day? I mean, yoga or or
yoga. I laugh because I don't think my joints are up to yoga. I think I probably sat in that position for a while. It was like today, I had two choices of chair. There was either the chair that gave me good posture and creaked, or there was the silent chair where I developed the posture of a melting jelly. So I decided that the soft melting jelly was the route to take. I do go to the gym. I have a trainer, and I go to the gym twice a week. Except at the moment we're doing it electronically, which isn't the same because I don't put quite the same effort into it. Exercise is something that I've come to in the last 10 years or so. And it's honestly more about my head than my body. I feel it's a really important part of my week is fairly strenuous exercise. I run a lot, I lift a few weights, whatever, and I love it. I feel great afterwards. And I don't do it to keep my weight down or anything. I do it because I go into a different headspace when I'm exercising.
Sure. So,
I feel good afterwards.
So it's more a physical thing than it is, say, a religious or philosophical practice, or?
Yes. I do spend a lot of time with a book. Now, I'd love to say reading, but what happens is I open a book to read, a novel, whatever. And shortly after it, I mean, a few minutes, I can feel myself starting to fall asleep. I'm one of those people who, when I don't really relax. When I stop, then that's it. I start to nod off. It's one of the reasons I think I watch crime dramas in the evenings on television, because I can quietly nod off, and I know that in a couple of weeks they're going to repeat it, so I'll be able to catch a bit more of it each time. I'm either busy or I'm asleep.
Do you watch food programs on television? I mean, we are inundated now. In a way, it's a lovely thing because food the sort of food that we eat and that's available to us has changed enormously in the last 20 or 30 years. But you can hardly switch the telly on now without watching something that is all these competitive programs. And what's your feeling about those?
So there are a couple of people I thoroughly enjoy watching them cook, and I really, really like watching a bit of home cookery. But when TV cookery loses me is when it becomes a contest, and there has to be a winner, and there have to be losers and tears, and everybody talks about their journey. And although I am as happy watching Bake Off as anybody, the idea that we can spend an hour a week watching lovely people making scones is irresistible. I mean, it's the most relaxing program on television. But the what I call chefy programs, I think watching somebody make something, watching the creativity and the craft of them making something is very stimulating. It's something I thoroughly enjoy doing. But it loses interest for me when it becomes about winning and losing. I don't see why cooking has to be put on the scales like that. You know, all of the lovely people who've been in Bake Off and have gone on to do their own things, and I've enjoyed them so much. But ask me who wins and who loses, I don't know, because I'm not really very interested in that side of it. And yes, I think there is a place for TV cookery, but as a viewer, I couldn't care less about the contests at all.
From the conversations that you and I have had, I have come to the conclusion that you are one of the least competitive people that I've met, and yet you keep winning things.
You know, there isn't a
you win
in my body.
You win. Your work wins, whether it be the cookery side or whether it be the literary side. It's extraordinary. You're winning things all the time.
Well, I don't know. I tend not to enter things, but sometimes you don't know that your work has been entered, and it is lovely when somebody says, you know, that you've won something. But I don't really ever think about that. I don't do it for that. It's just a lovely little, you know, fillip to the day, really. But it's certainly not the reason I do what I do. You know, I ended up writing accidentally. I mean, it was I was just asked to put some words to some photographs that I'd been working on. I'd been cooking for a photographer, a photography session, and they were to be sent into a magazine. And they said, "Well, would I write a little piece about the recipes?" And so I never meant to be a cookery writer. So it's always a surprise to me to see my name in print. I mean, every sort of Sunday I open the paper and there it is again. It was never my intention, but I'm very pleased that it worked out that way, because I love it.
So are we. We're very pleased to, because we enjoy so much the products of what you do. And is there someone who, a cook or chef or whatever, who you would say has influenced you?
A very interesting question, because I always feel as if I'm not particularly inspired by anybody else. I mean, I know the answer should always be, well, yes, I'm inspired by Elizabeth David, but I wasn't. There are people I feel a kinship with. I mean, Nigella's, you know, we come from the same place in a foodie sense. We both love making something to eat and we love sharing it. But I don't ever think that I've particularly been inspired by anyone. I just potter along doing my own thing, really. And I'm always very grateful when people like it. And the idea that you've invented something completely new, I mean, I haven't seen a truly new recipe for as long as I can remember. They're all versions of something. The idea comes from another recipe. So I don't know. I guess I just bubble along doing my own thing, really.
Do you have? I was going to ask you about when you go out to dinner. is there a favourite restaurant or favourite restaurants that you go to?
There are. I enjoy it when a chef is having a bit of fun, when they do the things that I would never do at home. That's sort of rather elaborate, very painstaking cooking. I can't do it, so I quite enjoy that. It's something that's not really. I don't belong to that world, but I can admire it. It's rather like, I buy clothes that last me a long time and I'm going to be wearing for 20 years, but I still watch the shows and the Met Gala to see who's wearing what. And it's a bit like that. I want to be dazzled. I want someone to have a bit of fun and to join them. But what I really like about a restaurant is when the food is just part of the ebb and flow of the evening. It becomes part of the conversation, but it doesn't take over. When you sit down in a restaurant and you suddenly realize that you're almost expected to fall silent at this wonderful piece of artistry that's been put in front of you, that I always think looks as if it's on the edge of a nervous breakdown. This sort of food that silences the table. Now, that's not my idea of fun. I like food that is never more important than the people I'm eating with and the conversation that I'm having. I love eating well. And I love going to a restaurant. Having a menu in my hand is one of, it's just utter bliss that someone else is cooking for me. But I like food that sort of chats away, that quietly whispers along in the meal. I don't like shouty, loud, look at me food. So I will always choose a restaurant for its ambience, for the staff, for the way they make me welcome. And the food, I'm afraid, always comes second.
We first spoke when you were kind enough to buy some pots from us.
Oh, your gorgeous pot. Can I just say, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I just say, getting a package from you is such a joy, partly because of the way you pack it. It's almost Japanese. It is an absolute art form. Undoing one of your parcels is one of the great joys of my life. Sorry, Karen.
That's really kind of you. And we actually ship every day all over the world. I mean, I don't think a day goes by when we don't send 2 or 3 pots, certainly to America. And so we have to ensure, because they are fragile things, as you know, we have to ensure that they are not, they're not cheap. It's not no money. It's often considerable amounts of money, certainly with the great potters. So we did have to work out. Certainly, what was very interesting when we started, every time something arrived slightly, something which didn't travel properly, and it was broken or dented or something went wrong, we used to send a bunch of flowers. The first thing we did was to send a bunch of flowers by way of apology. And it cost us a fortune in bunches of flowers. And it was after that we really learned how to pack and ship properly. But I'm glad you like that.
It's really important, and particularly the care that you take over packaging something, because I always believe that no matter how much you pay for a pot, it's never actually yours. It's somehow, I believe it still really belongs to the potter. It's theirs. So if I break it, if I am responsible for damaging that, I've actually damaged their pot. I'm only looking after it for a while, and then it'll go on, when I've gone, it'll go on to hopefully go on to someone else. So packaging, it is very, very important, but it's also a treat. It feels like Christmas.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've forgotten what I was going to ask you now. We're talking about
the pots I had from you are they bring me pleasure in all sorts of ways. Partly because I use them.
Yes,
there are a few pieces that I have that are purely decorative, but in most cases, I think that potters, when they're making something, they make it to be used. I don't think they think that in 200 years' time it's going to be sitting on a shelf. People looking at it in awe. I think they wanted it to be used. So very carefully, I use pretty much everything that I've got.
I've got a question here from Phil Rogers, who's one of the great potters that we look after. In fact, Reverend Richard Coles chatted with him on our TV the other day, and he writes, I saw a picture article about Nigel Slater's like of studio pottery. If it doesn't sound too cheeky or rude, can I ask Nigel Slater why the majority of the pots in his collection are very plain? Is it a personal preference, or is it that plainer, undecorated pots, in his view, suit food and show it off better without the distraction of the decoration?
Very, very interesting point. And yes, most of my pots are fairly plain. The colours are quite muted. Now, partly that's because I like those colours, but also because, yes, it works with food. There is that thing that happened a few years ago when very brightly coloured plates were very popular, very brightly coloured bowls. And sometimes food worked with them, and sometimes it just argued. I do believe that food can look very comfortable on a plate, or it can look uncomfortable. And without getting too precious about what works with what, I really love it when something is presented on a plate or a bowl where the ceramics flatter the food and vice versa. So yes, I don't want to put something I've made onto a piece of craftsmanship that actually is going to end up arguing with it. And the two of them, they're not in unison, they're not comfortable together. So that is why a lot of my stuff is quite plain. And also, I'm sorry, I am a cookery writer and I'm a cook, and I do want the food. I don't want it to be overshadowed by a slightly too decorative piece of flatware. So that's why it will always be quite plain. The more decorative pieces I keep for the shelf.
Do you have any time for this food being presented on a plank of wood?
No, not really.
Always struck me as being...
They are perfect for a plate. They keep it warm for a long time. If you put, some soup or something into a bowl and you hold that bowl, you can feel that food. You can actually feel it in your hand. Ceramics also, they're often very gentle colors and they work with food. And when you see something on a piece of jet black granite or something, I've seen things on trays and all sorts of ghastly things. Country pubs are one of the places to find things where too much imagination has been used. And I really don't like it at all. I think it argues and fights. It's not right.
Yes. Got a sheaf of questions here. What shall we pick out? Oh yes, somebody's asking what it is about Japan that you like so much. You go back year after year.
Well, I've been going there for about 10 years. I spend about a month a year there. I suppose it's partly, there's a certain reverence for other people and for things, for objects that I like. So I've always been amazed at the respect that a lot of Japanese people have for other people. And I like that because it isn't always relevant here sometimes, particularly in the city, in London. I like that. I also like the pace at which a lot of life moves, particularly outside Tokyo. There is a slower pace, and I enjoy that. But also, there is that thing you can't put your finger on, where it just feels right. I like the food. I like being there. I like the speed at which, I like the efficiency of Japan. I want to know that the 12:21 to Osaka is going to leave at 12:21. I love that. And, the fact that the ticket collector bows at the end of the carriage only adds to the joy of it. It's a very charming way of saying, welcome to the train. I do like that. The little rituals that are part of Japanese life, I enjoy. And also I love sitting for hours up to my knee in warm water. I love it.
Talking about Osaka, my son Jay has given me a question. He goes to Japan filming potters and interviewing them for the films that we make. And he wants the recommendation for a good Japanese restaurant in Osaka.
Well, this curious thing about Osaka is that you can't walk more than 20 feet without a restaurant. It's absolutely, off the top of my head, because I don't speak Japanese, I mean barely a word. I tend to truly follow my nose when I'm looking for a restaurant. I will just walk along, and if it looks right, and if it smells right when I open the door, and they've got room for me, then I'll go in. So I've been to restaurants all over Japan, particularly in Kyoto and in Tokyo, several times, and I still don't know their names. I just go in and I keep going back and being welcomed. But you can't really go wrong in Osaka. It's almost the foodie capital of Japan, really.
I've got another question here also about from someone called Emily. What are the places that you've most enjoyed in Japan? Do you have favorite places there?
I actually enjoy everywhere, but for different reasons. I like the craziness of Tokyo. I like the speed it moves, and I like the madness of it all. But then again, the Museum of Oriental Ceramics in Osaka is one of my favorite places on earth. Partly because it's a silent museum, you're not supposed to speak. The Raku Museum in Kyoto, where they give you the most wonderful velvet slippers to wear when you walk in. These are some of my favorite places. Just really mooching around. I mean, I'm somebody who walks a lot, and I get lost a lot. So I will just potter along until I suddenly think, where am I? And Google Maps don't really work terribly well, so you really can get lost in Japan. Anywhere, any sort of village that I go to where I end up having to order my meal in sign language, I'm just really happy, because it feels such a different culture, and I'm in such a different place. That's when I'm really, really happy. It's when I check into a hotel and they say, "Hello, Mr. Slater," that's when my heart slightly sinks.
There's a question here from one of our customers, Cornelia Ahern, and she's just written in to say, does Nigel have a favourite potter whose dishes he uses the most?
Isn't that like saying which is your favourite child or your favourite pet? I don't think you're supposed to. There is, there are pieces that work. Always. There are, Florian Gadsby, young potter whose work I think is very flattering to food, my everyday work. I've got some Rupert Spira plates that work beautifully. It tends to be the pieces that I use over and over again are pieces that actually get a little bit better with each use. So maybe the glaze will crackle a little bit more each time it goes through the dishwasher. And I do put things through the dishwasher. And I'm very happy with that. Sometimes you'll get a stain on a plate from some beetroot or blackcurrants, which only adds to the joy of it. It creeps under the glaze and leaves little marks. And I love all that, when you can see that a bowl or a plate has had a life in the kitchen. But I don't really necessarily like to think who's made it sometimes. It's just a plate that works, and that's that.
Part of the culture, certainly the culture of Japanese and Korean pots, is that the potter makes it, and then we, in a way, make it again and give it another life as it changes, both by what we put into it and by the way we handle it, and sometimes indeed by the odd chip that we give it. So that it connects us with the potter and then with the food in a very, very special way.
I love that connection between the potter and the person who's using that particular bowl or plate. I think it's why I love work where I can almost feel that potter, I can almost feel his fingerprints or his or her life that has gone into that day of making that piece. That now it's mine, I'm sharing it with them, but I can feel their presence. And I do love that. And I very often would like people to know that I am using their work. Occasionally I have the opportunity to credit a potter, not always, but I can mention them in a book or something, and that gives me enormous pleasure to let them know it's being used and that I am still getting that connection, and then in a way that pot is sort of still with them. It never quite leaves them.
I've always thought that great pots are invariably made by highly intelligent people, and they have often given up what might have been an extremely lucrative career in almost anything to spend their lives with their hands in cold water, busting their bodies, and often in the early days in abject poverty, to make pots, driven to make pots. And the ones that really succeed, the great ones, by the time if they're still trying to make better pots as they get into their 50s and 60s and even 70s, what they do is very special. And that, with all that practice, those thousands of hours, there's a generosity of spirit often which actually goes from them, flows from them into the pot. And when we put particularly both paws round that pot, when there isn't a handle that separates us, and we take that and we put it to our lips, which in a way it's a hell of a thing to do. It's a very personal thing to do. I think some of that generosity of spirit comes to us and makes the food taste better, makes us eat in a different way and drink in a different way.
I absolutely agree, wholeheartedly. And I often think about who's made it when I'm eating from something, when I'm drinking from something. I think about them. And of course, you touched on the fact that it is quite a tough life. It's a tough job. And yet the end result is often so delicate and so easily lost, easily broken and shattered. It's a very fragile thing that they make. And yes, it is very hard work. So I'm always going to take care of something. I'm going to look after a piece. Because I think yes, it's bringing joy to me now, but it would break my heart at chipping something. Yes, kintsugi is the answer, I suppose, but I feel as if I've hurt the potter. They've put so much into this beautiful thing, and then I butterfingers, and I've clumsily chipped it. And I feel that I feel very guilty about that.
There may well be another way of looking at it, and that is, if it means that you're going to buy another one, spend more money with it.
Yes, well,
they'd be well pleased at that.
There is that.
Yes. I want to congratulate you on, if I may, on the OBE.
Thank you.
I think that's wonderful, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out and chatting with us and being so entertaining. And if I may say so, there is something which in Japan they have, and we don't yet. And in Japan they have national living treasures. And I suspect that if we had national living treasures in this country, you, Nigel Slater, would be one. I really think so.
Thank you very, very much. That's lovely to hear.
Thanks so much for entertaining us and for taking time out.
It's an utter joy. It's lovely to talk with you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We need to educate, entertain our customers.
Okay, so now we're going to look at some other of his prints.
I'm thinking very seriously about stopping making pots.
There's nothing forced, and I think his jogs are really the epitome of that.
Hello, welcome to today's broadcast from the Goldmark Gallery.
One of my most regular places to visit up in this part of the world is the Goldmark Gallery.